Hey guys, so it has been so long since I've done a wrap-up video. It actually was last done in August of last year. So I'm going to be covering all of the books that I have read since then. I will not be going into in-depth detail about all these books because it is just far too many. But first I'm just going to share the books that I read from September through December of last year, and I'm just going to share their star rating, and I'll just show a picture of the book cover because I read 19 books and that's just too much to get into detail with them. I'm not going to share them entirely in the order read because I did read a lot of books in a series, so I'll just kind of group these by the author and then also by the series so it's easier to follow along. In September, I was reading the series by Kendare Blake, so I read One Dark Throne and Two Dark Reigns, and I gave both of these books 4 stars. Then I read The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare and gave that 4 stars. Next, I started a series by Candy Steiner. The first one, On the Rocks, I gave 4.5 stars. The second book, Neat, I gave 4 stars. Manhattan, I gave 3 stars. Moving along in the month of October, I read Well Met by Jen DeLuca, and I gave that 3.5 stars. Then I read Coming of Roses by Stacey Hart, and I gave that 3 stars. Then I read The Guy on the Right by Kate Stewart, and I gave that 4.5 stars. And later on in the year, I read The Guy on the Left by Kate Stewart, and I gave that 3.5 stars. I read Wait For It by Mariana Zapata, and gave that 4.5 stars. This was probably my favorite book in this whole part of this wrap-up. Just saying, I really loved that. I read Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan and gave that 4 stars, and I also read the sequel by her, Block Shot, which I gave 2 stars. I really did not like that book at all. Moving along in December, I read The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware and gave that 4 stars. I read The Wrong Game by Candy Steiner and gave that 3 stars. I read Welcome to the Dark Side by Gian Darling and gave that 2 stars. I read The Kingmaker by Kennedy Ryan and gave that 3 stars. Then I read Irresistible by Melanie Harlow and I gave that 3 stars. And finally, I read Regretting You by Colleen Hoover and I gave that 4 stars. So those are all of the books that I read from September through December. And now I'm going to be getting into the books that I read from January through April. I have 9 books to talk about in this section, so I will give a little bit more detail about these books, but I'll still keep it pretty short. So in January, I read The Gravity of Us by Brittany Sage Sherry, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is about this horror author novelist, and he is pretty much a robot. He has no emotion. There's a woman who enters his life who is the complete opposite of him, and it's their love story. Next, I read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. This was a reread for me. Loved it, obviously, 5 stars. Super enjoyed it. I really liked the 6th book. It's one of my favorites in the whole series, so I love getting to read that book. So that was a reread. Then I read Outmatched by Kristen Callahan with the Romance Tech Book Club, and I really enjoyed this one. I think I gave it like a 3.5 star. It was just a cutesy rom-com story about this guy named Reese. He's an ex-boxer who owns this gym that is not doing so hot, and he enters this fake dating relationship thing, which I love that trope, with this girl named Parker, and she needs a boyfriend because she just got hired to work for this company, and they really only like women there who are settled and to have significant others. So she hires him basically to be her boyfriend, and also he's gonna benefit from it because she has some contacts with her company who can help his gym. And it's a romance because obviously. In the month of February, I read 2 books. I read a cozy mystery called The Secret Book and Scone Society, and this was so cute. It's just what I was in the mood for. It takes place in a small town in North Carolina with 4 women who come together to solve this crime that actually ends up involving some people from their town and this conspiracy with this construction building house company. Really good, really cozy, and there was just fun characters in general. It had such a good cozy ambiance because our main character, she owns a bookstore, and she has this kind of talent for talking to someone and prescribing the perfect book for that person, and it helps like change their life and everything. I loved it. It was so cute. I gave that one 4 stars. Then I read The Worst Best Man. This was also a pick for the Romance Tech Book Club. I gave this book 3.5 stars. A super cute, light and fluffy rom-com. It's following our main character who is a wedding planner. I mean, you can kind of tell. She was jilted at the altar. Well, not exactly at the altar, but her fiance broke up with her the day of her wedding, and it was her fiance's brother who broke the news to her. So this story actually takes place a few years later. She's pretty successful and she's trying to get this job for a hotel company, and she's working on this pitch to become their like wedding planner coordinator for this really nice hotel. And she actually ends up working with her ex-fiance's brother on the pitch, and her fiance is working with another planner to work on a separate pitch, and it's kind of like whoever wins gets the job sort of thing. I would recommend if you're just in the mood for like a little bit of a rom-com, nothing too serious, but I did enjoy it. So like I said, 3.5 stars. In March, I finished up the series, the Becker Brothers series by Candy Steiner with Old Fashioned. This is the 4th book following the oldest brother who's adopted. So I really liked this romance series in general. The first 2 books definitely were the best in my opinion, and the 3rd and the 4th were just okay. This romance follows, he's a high school football coach, and the ex-police chief's wife, she gets hired on to be their athletic trainer, and it's their romance. She's still a little bit living in fear from her ex-husband because he was kind of an abusive man and he still has all of this power and control over her life. So their romance was just okay. The part that I liked about this book was getting answers for the series that we've been waiting for this whole book series. So there is a thread going on in this. It takes place in a small town in Tennessee, and it's really involving this whiskey distillery that's a part of their family. Their father was killed in a fire that happened at the distillery a few years prior to this book starting. It didn't really make sense. It seemed like there was a little bit more going on under the surface of it all, and that kind of does finally get wrapped up. A part of it was really predictable. I knew pretty much from book 1 like what the reason was and what had happened, but it takes 4 books for them to discover like what actually happened to their father. There was still some surprises that I did not see coming, so I am glad that there were some surprises in there. And then I read historical fiction, All the Ways We Say Goodbye. This is a novel that's kind of set around the Ritz in Paris. So there are 3 different stories. There's one that takes place in World War I, and she's kind of like the daughter to this nobleman, and she becomes this symbol for France during the war. The second story follows her daughter during World War II as she's helping with the French resistance in Paris. The last character that we follow is post-World War II in the 60s. She travels to Paris to kind of get some answers for when her husband was stationed in Paris during the war, and kind of uncovering some mystery there. So all of the stories do tie together, but I really did like that this World War II story was not super heavy like a lot of World War II stories tend to be. This one didn't have any concentration camp scenes, which I'm very grateful for. I've read a lot of those in my time, and I was not in the mood to read something that heavy, and I'm glad this didn't have that. So of course it's obviously still on the heavier side because it's about war, but I did find it to be a little bit more lighthearted than what I'd read before. And also, I did not expect this, but there were 3 romances. Each story had its own romance, which I really wasn't expecting, and each one was unique, and I liked all of them. So overall, for like 4.5 stars, I thought it was a really good historical fiction. In April, I read 2 books. I read The 2 Lives of Lydia Bird by Josie Silver. This I gushed about in my reading vlog. I really did enjoy this. It's a contemporary, almost slight magical realism-ish, but not really, story. It's about this woman, Lydia, whose fiance gets killed in a car accident, and it's her life after. And she has trouble falling asleep, so her psychiatrist prescribes her some pills to help her sleep. But when she takes these pills and goes to sleep, she wakes up in an alternate world where her fiance is actually still alive. So this whole book, she's struggling with being asleep and being awake, because when she's awake, she's living this life where there's all of this pain and hurt. But when she goes to sleep, she wakes up and he's never been killed, and her life is continuing on with him as it would have if he had been still living. So her kind of coming to terms with her actual life is really second place to her alternate life and working through her grief, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't a romance. I'm not gonna say it's a romance because I did not think this was a romance at all, even though it's categorized as a romance because it's about the romance of her and her fiance, but it's really more just contemporary women's fiction, I think I would say. And I really enjoyed it, but definitely heavy on the grief side, and be aware if you've lost a significant other or lost someone close to you, this may be a little hard to read. I felt emotional, and I haven't experienced that. So just go into that with caution if you have lost someone very close to you. And I read Where the Crawdads Sing. Read this with some friends, and it was so good. I'd been recommended this book quite a few times, so I am glad that I finally got to reading it. And once I got past like the beginning-ish. Once I figured out what this book was about, I really did start to enjoy it. It is a coming-of-age story following this girl Kaya who lives on the edge of society. She lives in this marsh. She kind of has to learn how to fend for herself. You follow her from a child all the way through young adulthood, and she is really abandoned by everybody, and so she has to figure out how to live and survive and become one with the marsh. It's a romance story. There's also a murder that happens, and you're kind of flashed forward to it throughout the book. You're kind of leading up to that murder the whole book and seeing how it even plays a role in Kaya's story and Kaya's life. I really loved the character of Tate, who is the love interest, and then Jumpin, who's kind of the father figure to Kaya that she never really had. And it's really a good story. It was emotional too, just because of the relationships and ties that she has. So I would recommend this if you have any interest in like a coming of age story like that. Definitely different from anything I've ever read before. Kaya herself is a character unlike any other. Those are all of the books. Thanks for staying tuned in this wrap up. If you have read any of these books, please let me know in the comments so we can chat about them. I know I talked about a lot of books, a total of 28 books in total. I really quickly went over. So I will just end this video here, but thank you so much for watching and happy reading.